Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Spanish white wine tasting for our favorite clients. It's so nice to have so many of my favorite people at one event. We founded Presilium Private Wealth to give you the best possible experience in all things financial. And as part of that, we love bringing you these virtual events, in-person events, and the regular videos that we put out. I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to please subscribe to both our podcast and our YouTube channels. These allow us to provide you with a short presentation that you think will find especially interesting each week. Down markets are really difficult, but we're doing everything possible to help you to benefit from this in the long run. You are all very well prepared for this, and we will get through this in a better position than ever before. Today was a great first step. The market was up more than 1,200 points, which was the sixth best day in history. So I'm looking forward to celebrating with all of you during this special white wine tasting. But first, I wanted to give a special thank you to our Vice President of Client Experience, Kelly Casper. Our client events take a tremendous amount of time and effort because we want them to be amazing for you. And Kelly did a great job setting this up for us tonight. Thanks so much, Kelly.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're so happy to have so many of you here. I have had the opportunity to speak with many of you, but for those who I haven't, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Kelly Casper, as Jerry said. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, I am married with 3 kids. Riley is 6, Ellie is 4, and baby Casey, as we call him, is 5 months. In my free time, which is not something that I have a whole lot of these days, but in my free time, I really just enjoy being outside and staying active, spending time with my 3 beautiful children and my husband. We have a really close family and we're very close with our extended family. So I just love spending time with them. We also really enjoy the beach, so we like getting there as much as we can. And just thank you again, everyone, so much for joining us tonight. And I'm really excited to see what Sarah has in store for us. So thanks, and I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kelly. And I also wanted to give a special thank you to my business partner, Brooke. We often start our day together around 6 a.m. at the gym that's close to our office, and then often finish together after 5 o'clock. He's certainly one of the most honest and trustworthy people that I've ever met, and also often outworks all of us. So Brooke, thank you. And I see you're in the Presilium conference room right now.
Yep, keeping an eye on things.
And then finally, I wanted to introduce our new friend, Sarah. Sarah has been in the wine and food world for over 25 years. She is a master sommelier candidate, a certified wine educator, and a graduate of the WSET diploma program. She's been a wine educator since 2014. If you have any questions for Sarah, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Sarah, thank you for joining us tonight, and we're excited to get started.
I am so excited to get started. Thank you so much for the kind words and the wonderful introduction. Good evening, everybody. If there are any wine questions that you may have, please do post them into the chat. So we're going to be talking about Spanish wines today, and these are 3 top producers from the country. Do Ferrero Albarino is a benchmark producer for Albarino. Do Ferrero is the benchmark producer of Albarino in Galicia. Muga, a benchmark producer for Rioja. And Terroir Limit, even though they're only about 21 years old, have quickly risen to the top of the ranks. So before we get started, I want to let you know that all of these wines, and start sipping if you want to start sipping, don't hold back. And I hope you all have snacks in front of you as well. You might not finish all of these wines, and that's okay. These wines are built so well, they will be able to withstand 5 to maybe even 2 weeks being open in the fridge. So after this wine class, if you don't finish the bottle, put the cork back in it, or if you have one of those rubber stoppers and it sucks out all the oxygen, do that to the wine, store them in your fridge, and that slows down the aging and oxidation process, which allows the wine to live longer. The Do Ferrero Albarino in particular, I have had in my fridge for 2 weeks. And I went back to it because I had forgotten about it because I store a lot of open wine bottles in my fridge. And I was like, oh my God, the Del Ferrero. And it was still fantastic. So well made. So snack, and if there are any questions, the webinar chat, and let's get started. So Spain is one of the things I want to get across today is how very, very old of a winemaking country Spain is. It's extremely old. It started with the Phoenicians in about 1100 BC, and they brought over their commerce knowledge and maritime knowledge. They started planting grapes. Followed by them were the Carthaginians, who planted more, and then followed by the Moors, I believe, in 711. And then they tolerated grape planting, but not so much wine consumption. That was followed by the Romans, I believe. I'm checking my notes. I just want to make sure that I'm getting this right. Romans, and the Romans planted more and actually exported most of what they made to other parts of the Roman Empire. We get into the Christians, who really expanded stuff, and the Christians really expanded things in Spain from a wine growing perspective from about the 13th century, so 1200s, to about the late 1500s or early 1600s. So think like shortly after Christopher Columbus. And then after that, and the whole time, everyone is planting grapes, making wine, and having a great time with wine. And after the Christians, after the end of the Christians, there were monks in the 1700s who were like, I really want to learn more about winemaking, because all we make in Spain really is fortified wines. And as an aside, if you don't know what a fortified wine is, wines that have had brandy or a grape distillate added to the wine. And what that does is it extends the wine's life and it fortifies them so they don't oxidize or age, and they have a much longer shelf life. So those are the main wine styles of wine, the fortified wines that were being made and exported in Spain. So in the 1700s, there were monks who were like, I really want to learn more. So they traveled to France, and in France, they were not making fortified wines. They looked to Bordeaux, and the Bordelais were making dry white and red wines in barrels. And these Spanish monks were like, oh my God, that's such a great idea. So they started experimenting with it in the 1700s. It took a while for it to take off. And in the 1800s, it really took hold. And then in the late 1800s, with a lot of transatlantic trade, there was this root louse, this pest called phylloxera, that was imported from the United States into France. And it first went to Bordeaux, because Bordeaux has always been known for their wines. This root louse took hold in Bordeaux first, decimated the vineyards. Wine demand fell because primarily there was no production, but because those monks had set their sights on learning more, there were Spanish wines that replaced all of those French wines that you could no longer get, which was great for Spain. Unfortunately, the phylloxera pest traveled down to Spain eventually about 50 years later, but by that time, everyone kind of knew what was going on. So they replanted in Spain. And then in the 1930s, with the Spanish Civil War, they go under a dictatorship, which was really unfortunate for their economy, but winemakers and wine growers, grape growers, stayed really, really curious. So they traveled around, not only within Europe, but outside of Europe, to learn what other people were doing, how they were making wine, what techniques they were using. They brought that back with them. With Spain getting into the EU in 1986, they were flooded with cash and investments. So they had all these investments for production and research and just new technology, which was great. And we see the benefits of that today. So that is a really condensed version of Spanish wine history. I want to show you a map of Spain, and this is such, I found this, I couldn't even believe it. This was just such a cool, let me see if I can find it. So generally speaking, the climate of Spain is warm. However, it does have an extensive coastline and lots of different mountain ranges throughout the country. So you get varied, here it is. Can you guys see that? You get varied climates. Here is, in this corner, Galicia. It's the part that hangs over Portugal. It is an oceanic maritime climate that gets rain throughout the year. And that poses an issue because there's a high fungal disease pressure. Luckily though, Albarino, the grape that we're going to be drinking first, has a very thick skin. So it thwarts rot, which is great. It's also an early ripening varietal, which is also good. So it's not hanging out in the humidity super long. But what we expect out of Albarino is high, brisk, energetic acidity, maybe notes of melon, peaches, or apricot or citrus. And they're extremely delicious with everything and anything that comes out of the ocean. There's a huge port called Vigo that is in Galicia. That is one of the major ports for seafood, actually, that supplies Europe, and it's in Galicia. And they harvest everything from tuna to sardines to razor clams, everything, octopus, squid, everything. So anything that comes out of those oceans is perfect with Albarino. The next place we're going to go to is Rioja. And Rioja is right around here, and it's protected from the Atlantic by the Cantabrian Mountains, which is good. So it doesn't have that kind of oceanic influence. Here in Rioja, the climate is continental. And what that means is warm, sunny summers, but then really cold winters, which is great for the grapevines. So they actually get a chance to rest for several months. The last place we're going is Priorat, and Priorat is over here by Barcelona. It's about not quite a 2-hour drive inland from Barcelona. That is a Mediterranean climate. And in Mediterranean climates, you get no rain throughout the summertime, but then you get rain throughout the wintertime, which is great for the grapevines. So when they're dormant, they get to drink a lot of water. Very specific to Priorat are the soil types. They're called licorea, and they are this really dark, almost black, friable slate that lend a very particular, almost granite-like flavor to the wines. And what I'm going to do next is pull up another map of Spain, which is really, really great. So just to confirm it, this is where we're starting. This is where we're finishing. This is where we're going, Rioja over here, and then we're finishing over here in Priorat. So our first wine today, let's taste. Cheers, everybody. We're tasting the Do Ferrero Albarino. And when I taste wine, the first thing I do is look at it, because we eat with our eyes first, right? So when I look at this wine, it's totally clear. It's pretty brilliant as well. I don't see anything floating in it, which is great. And that's one of the things that you look for when you look at the appearance of a wine. There are some unfiltered wines that you might find ladybugs or large mosquitoes in. I've seen it myself, but most wines these days are filtered, so you don't get those big bugs in your wine or any other large colloids or proteins or anything. So after I look at it, I smell it. I really stick my nose in the glass. And I get just a very quick sense of what I smell. On this, I get the color orange, almost like my blouse, but it smells like mandarins and mandarin leaf and like underripe peaches and apricots. And that's exactly what you want to smell on your Albarino. Then I take a taste. And when I taste, I swish it all over my palate. I can't do it quite like mouthwash because I have sensitive teeth, but if you don't have sensitive teeth, swish it around your mouth like mouthwash, give it swallow it, and then notice what happens to your palate. So let's do that. Cheers, everybody. And I'm going to spit mine out, because if I don't, every wine is going to be the best wine in the world. So what I want you to notice on this Albarino Do you notice how much your mouth is watering? That's that bright, energetic acidity, that brisk acidity that I was talking about. And imagine that with any kind of seafood, there's a salty, it almost tastes like fog, doesn't it? And I want to show you also a picture or two of Galicia. And this is what it looks like. Those are vineyards. They are right on the ocean. And there are some wine scientists who are still learning, so it's not definitive, but they're still learning how this foggy-like minerality, almost like the saltiness, where you get the saltiness of the ocean in the grape, how does that happen? They're finding that in foggy vineyards, the grapes take on that foggy flavor, that oceanic flavor, more so with the fog than if it's just nearby and you don't get as much fog. Super interesting. I want to show you also another photograph of, this is super cool. This is exactly what this place looks like. Tons of fog, but also notice the vines and how they're raised above the ground. That's called pergola training. And they're raised high off the ground so that there's a lot of air circulation underneath. And they want that because, as I said before, with this foggy area, it can suffer from a lot of rot. There's a lot of disease pressure there. And if you leave them really close to the ground, you risk more fungal disease and rot. So these are all pergola trained and they're super high off the ground. Look at how high off the ground that is. So they can also put fans in the vineyard to circulate the air. This canopy up top allows for some humidity to stick around, which actually can be a good thing if it's a super sunny day. But this also provides a lot of shade, which is also good for super sunny days because you don't want the sun directly on your grapes all the time during ripening season. So I'd love to hear from you guys. How do you like this wine? What do you think of it? And also, if you can share, what are you eating with it? And then are there any questions about Spain or winemaking or Galicia in general? I'm waiting with bated breath for the chat room to fill up. Come on.
While we're waiting for that, Sarah, I had a question. What's the ideal temperature to serve this at?
That is a great question. So I would say not right out of the fridge, definitely not right out of the fridge. I took these out of, they spent overnight in the fridge last night. I took them all out at 5:15 p.m. And I know in the notes it said at least 30 minutes. I don't know about you guys, but my fridge is really, really cold. I think I keep it at 35 degrees or 34 degrees. And excuse me. I brought them out and I actually poured them into the glasses. So the glasses now, I mean, even now while I touch the glasses, they're actually still quite cool. I'd say that these are probably 60 degrees at this point, 55 degrees. But what you don't want is white wines that are straight out of the fridge. Grapes are just like us, kind of like that People magazine article that you see every month in the where it's Us magazine, like stars, they're just like us. But for real, grapes, they are just like us. If they get too cold, much like us in the wintertime, we bundle up and you're like, I'm too cold. I can't talk right now. I really need to warm up. And then once you start warming up, you can take off your jacket, you take off your hat, and you let your hair down. Same thing with wine, with grapes. They need to be not ice cold. And conversely, they need to be not super hot. You want a very happy Goldilocks medium. So if there are any of you who have Eurocavs or wine fridges at home, 55 degrees is great for your reds, anywhere between 54 and 58 degrees, and keeping your humidity at 55%. And then for your whites, 45 degrees is ideal. The fridge is great for overnight if you want to get it really good and cold, but it takes so much longer to cool down your wine than it does to warm up your wine. So I like to get my wines pretty cool, and then they warm up pretty quickly in the glass. And something that you can do, if you find that your white wine or red wine is too cold out of the cellar or the fridge, You can rest it in the palm of your hand like that. I don't know if you can see that. You can rest it in the palm of your hand like that. And just kind of gently swirl it around, and it'll bring it up a few degrees very quickly. I still see no questions. That's okay. I hope everyone is enjoying this Albarino. I love this Albarino. This producer also super small, family run. They're on their 3rd generation. The current generation is a guy named Manu, who just took over the winemaking responsibilities in 2015. This family has over 175 plots, non-contiguous, which they hand work, hand harvest. It takes so much work, and they practice organics, which is a lot more difficult than farming commercially, where you're just spraying stuff all over the vines and all over the vineyard. They also allow chickens to peck around, which are natural pest control. And they also add nitrogen back to the soil, which is an element that is necessary for grape growing. I'm throwing a lot of nerdy stuff at you guys today, but you can handle it.
No, this is good, Sarah. This group will love it.
Great.
What's the longest you could keep this wine before open it and drink?
That is also, excuse me, a great question. Not COVID, everybody. I'm getting over a cold. How long could you keep these? Albarino, I would say, is one of those grapes. If it's just a basic Albarino, Rias Baixas or Salnas or one of the subzones, I would say you want to drink it between 3 and 5 years after harvest, after the date on the label. For other wines, these other wines, I would say Muga Rioja can age. I would say that the 2021 Muga Rioja, I would say it drinks now. 5-10 years under proper conditions, and especially their reservas or Grand Reservas, you can age those for decades. Absolutely. The terroir limit, because this is more of a blend to showcase a region and what the region should taste like, I would say that we're drinking it around its peak. I'd say the peak for this wine was 2021, but up to probably 2024. That's my guess on that one, just from tasting it. Okay, so I'm in the Q&A. Chance seems to really enjoying this wine. Great, shrimp cocktail. Perfect. Yes. I love it. Very smooth, little sweet, but not too sweet. Yes, absolutely. And I love how you said that it's sweet, but not sweet. And that is totally true. There is a ripeness there, right? There's a ripeness, but it's not sweet like Coke is or any kind of syrup. So it almost like it tricks your brain into thinking, oh, there is sweetness, but it is totally dry on my palate. That is totally true. Oh, not a wine expert. That's okay. I want to make sure I understand the difference from reds. There are no tannins in the white wines like reds. Is that true? Also a great question. There can be tannins in white wine, and we will notice a little bit of those with the last white, the Priorat. And that's because there was a little bit of skin contact. So tannins are amino acids or proteins that live in the skins, the seeds, and the stems of the grapes. And if you let your grape juice, right after you crush the grapes, hang out with the skins, you actually extract some of the tannins. White wines are not meant to be tannic. So it might only get a few hours or maybe a week's worth or 30 days worth of skin contact, depending on the wine style that was desired by the winemaker. But the Priorat, we'll notice, is just very, very light. But yes, there are more tannins in red wines because they extract the colors and the tannins for a lot longer. Are there any vineyards in the US that have any comparable Albarinos? What a great question. I feel like you're testing me for the Master Sommelier exam. What I would do is go to cooler sites. So to find cooler sites in the US, you either go really close to the ocean or you go high in elevation. There are some higher elevation vineyards in the Willamette Valley that do grow Albarino, and they're testing it out. I would look there. Chehalem Mountain is probably an appellation that you want to look for Albareños in Oregon. And in California, I would do Anderson Valley and Mendocino. I'd go to Mendocino. Mendocino is pretty cool. Or I would just look for anything that's really close by the ocean. That's what I would do. Would I consider this light wine? Yes. So what we're doing is mild to wild. That is our progression. So this one, medium bodied. Some of you might find it light bodied. And I'm not in your mouth. So you know how heavy or rich or textural this wine is, and any of the wines are. I would peg this at medium bodied. I'd say it's high acidity, and I think it's absolutely delicious and drinking really well. And I hope you agree, but you don't have to. I didn't make the wine. Okay, wine number two. Wine number two is Muga, and Muga has been around since 1932. A super duper fun fact about Muga is they are the only house in all of Spain where they have a master barrel maker and 3 assistants, the only one. So they make all of their own barrels, which is super cool. And most Rioja producers historically used American oak. And that was really because of colonial trade from the 16 and 1700s, which is super interesting. But a lot more Rioja producers or winemakers are experimenting and folding into their barrel program more French wines, French barrels. And what French barrels add are a bit more nuanced spice to the wine rather than American oak. And American oak tastes a lot more woody. And American oak, if you are a bourbon drinker, you know what American oak tastes like. It is vanilla and butterscotchy and almost like sucking on a 2x4 of cedar. That's American oak. French oak, again, much more nuanced and all about spice and cinnamon and nutmeg and warm baking spices. So let's pick up this Muga. As you look at it, as I look at it, it looks almost the same as the Albarino, but when we pick it up to smell it, it smells really different. The first thing I notice is that the nose almost isn't quite as pronounced as the Albarino is. The Albarino jumped right out of the glass, and it was all about that citrus and orange fruit. But on the Muga, it's really much more neutral. There's almost like a fennel note, sagebrush. It's much more neutral, much more in the pear and apple category, maybe smashed apple, crunchy, white, fleshy fruits like a crunchy Bartlett pear. And there's a touch of almost like vanilla custard that's way in the background. But let's put this on our palate and we'll see how it changes. Ooh. The first thing I want you to notice, it's roughly the same weight. So about medium bodied, I'd say, as the Albarino. My palate isn't watering as much. I'm still salivating, but not as much as I was with the Albarino. But do you notice the wood? Do you notice there's almost like a fresh forest floor or damp forest. Not quite sawdust, but as if you were walking past a woodworking station. Do you guys get that? If you don't, that's totally okay. But the fruit profile also is much more tree fruited and white fruited than the Albarino was, which was orange fruited. And I want to show you Rioja. This area is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, come on, really? How beautiful is that? So those are the Sierra Cantabrian Mountains, which are super, super high. And those are the mountains that block all of that oceanic influence from the north, from the Atlantic. So you get these beautiful, warm, long summers, which can also get pretty hot, but it's still at elevation. So this is not sea level. which helps with the grapes retaining freshness and acidity. The main grape in this is Viura, and Viura is known to be in the neutral camp. And they always, almost always, but truly always blend in Rioja. Very, very rarely. I'm thinking right now, I cannot think of any white Rioja that is a single varietal. Viura is the main grape. And because it's neutral, they tend to blend in grapes that have some aromatic qualities. So there is Malvasia that's in here that lends a little bit of aromatics. On this, it adds a little bit of jasmine or gentle white blossom. And then there is also a touch of Garnacha Blanca. Garnacha Blanca is a grape varietal that you see all over Spain. You also see Garnacha Tinto, which goes into Grenache, goes into Priorat, it goes into super fun early drinking wines that come from around Madrid, just north and south of Madrid. The issue that Garnacha has, both white and red grape, is that it oxidizes really easily. So you don't want to add too much oxidation during the winemaking process to Riojas, because the wine can turn really dark, which some people dislike, but it can also make the fruit profile go from more primary and fresh to secondary or tertiary, where it feels like it's a bit too mature. So Rioja producers have to play it really keenly to make sure that they maybe allow in a little bit of oxygen, because when you allow in just a little bit of oxygen, it kind of trains the grapes, it trains the wine to absorb oxygen later. So it's not shocked when it is exposed to oxygen later, as it's aging, but also when you open up the wine. So it doesn't fall flat super quickly after you open it and start drinking it. How does everyone like this wine? Let's go back to Q&A. Do you need to aerate white wine similar to reds? Sometimes, yes. You need to aerate a wine, whatever color it is. If you want to warm it up really quickly, you can give it a really quick splash decant. And to do a splash decant, all you do, I'm going to take an empty bottle here, is you imagine this is your wine bottle. You take your wine and you dump it straight out. There's water in there. You dump it straight out into a decanter. If you don't have a decanter, a vase works just fine too. And if it's really cold, that splash decant will help warm up the wine pretty quickly. Another reason why you would decant a wine, whether it's white or red, is if it's really, really old and you want to remove the wine off of its sediment. Another reason, the third reason why you would decant a white or red or even a rosé wine, is if it's a really young wine and it just needs a lot of air to blow off some stinky features that can happen if the wine was made under an anaerobic environment, in an anaerobic environment where there was zero oxygen. And when there's zero oxygen, they tend to smell really tanky and really closed. And oxygen is a friend to wine up until it's not. Oxygen lets the wine let its hair down and find its flavors and its character and its personality. But if there's too much oxygen, then it starts to turn the wine into vinegar. But that's a great question. And you can feel free to ask me any questions that are non-Spanish related, just like these questions. Is there anyone to determine percentages of grapes for Rioja? So the Consejo Regulador, which is the governing body over the Consejo Regulador of Rioja, every appellation in Spain has its own regulatory council, and that regulatory council is called the Consejo Regulador. So the Consejo Regulador worked with winemakers and grape growers in the 1930s. 1926 actually was when they first started, when they first founded their Consejo Regulador in Rioja. They worked with the wine growers and winemakers to determine, okay, well, how much Tempranillo are you using? And how much Garnacha Blanca are you using? And all these other things. So they came up with an approximation of, going to make a red Rioja, it should be minimum Tempranillo this, but maximum this, but it can be 100% Tempranillo because there are some areas within Rioja where it makes sense to do that for the reds. But for the whites, it doesn't really make sense to make a single varietal Rioja. because Vior, the primary grape varietal, as we talked about, is just a little bit too neutral. You can look on the producer's website if the producer did not list it on the label, which Muga did not do. And there are some producers who choose not to list the percentages at any point because they want the freedom. Oh, excuse me. They want the freedom. I'm just going to silence that. Because they want the freedom to make the wine that they want year in and year out. And they are also hedging their bets because some of these grape varietals are early butters and late ripeners, or early butters, early ripeners, or late butters, which avoid spring frosts, and then early, mid, or late ripeners. So it is always going to be a blend because you could get totally wiped out by an early spring frost and all your early budding varietals are totally gone. And then your yield is just decimated. So these are always going to be blends. You can also look to see who imports it. And that's a good trick. If you love a wine, whether it's this wine or any other wine, turn the bottle around and look at the back label and see who imports it. You can start following that importer. And if you love that wine, and if it's a Rioja, you want to see what the cepage was, you can go to the importer's website if the winemaker or the brand doesn't list it themselves. So that's another way to do it. You can also just Google it and look around. There are some reputable retailers who tend to add or include the cepage or the assemblage, like what the grapes are in that bottling. And Verve Wine is one of them. That's a really great retailer. Yeah, that's a good way to do it. But also just drink it. Delicious. Are there any other questions before we move on to the Priorat?
Sarah, is there a huge difference between years at the same vineyard? Are there?
Oh my God, yes, there are. Great question. Are in the Q&A, please answer, are there wine collectors in the bunch? So vintages do matter. Vintages matter because and this kind of goes into this question about climate change, because in really hot vintages, what's a good example? California and the Pacific Northwest started to get pretty hot around 2013, 2014, and it just started to ramp. In 2014, I believe it was, Oregon, the Willamette Valley, they were calling up their friends in Napa and Sonoma going, we've never seen this kind of heat before. What do we do? They're much more acclimated to it now in the Willamette Valley, but 2015, hotter than 2014, 2016, wicked hot, 17, hotter than F. And the Oregonians were like, oh my God, what you have to do is like work on your canopy management, on the leaves. The more leaves you have, the more it photosynthesizes. So the more quickly your grapes ripen, but you don't want your grapes to ripen too quickly because you want everything to kind of go pretty smoothly and slowly. But if they ripen too quickly, your acidity drops precipitously. So it is I don't know, it's a nail biter out there. And certainly I don't ever want to be a grape grower or a viticulturist, because that you can lose your crop if you don't even manage your canopy correctly. It's nuts. And then you can have super cloudy vintages. Like 2014 was a really not great year throughout most of Northern Europe and Western Europe. So cloudy vintage, what does that mean? It means that there was a lot of rain. There wasn't a ton of warmth or sunshine, which means the grapes really struggled to ripen. So what that means when we consume those 2014s, they might seem a little lean or anemic, or maybe really angular or really pokey with their acidity or with the tannins. And they might feel a little bit like a really scratchy wool blanket where you're like, it doesn't feel very cohesive or satinous. But then in really beautiful classic vintages where everything is perfect, You get beauty and grace and poise in the wine. And in hot vintages, I find that hot vintages don't cellar as long. You drink those before you drink your classic vintages. So an example of that would be you drink your 2015s now and you hold on your 2019s. So like if you drink Burgundy, I would drink your 15s before your 19s. How long is a grapevine productive for? Oh my God, what a great question. Does the same vine produce viable fruit continuously for an extended period of time? Yes, it does if you take care of it, and grapes can be over 100 years old. Australia actually has grapevines that are over 125 years old. If you take care of the grapevine and feed it really wonderful things to the soil, phosphorus and nitrogen, it will produce wine grapes for a very long time. As it ages, though, it produces fewer and fewer clusters, and then it puts all of its energy into those clusters. So as the vine ages, your yield drops, but the intensity and concentration, i.e. deliciousness, intensifies and just becomes so focused. So it's an arc. Take on climate change. So climate change is a real thing, and winemakers are seeing it and they are reacting to it. One of the places that I go to, I went to every year between 2010 and 2019, I did a Barolo trip every year with my husband, who's also in the wine business. And we went with the same group of people who are also in the wine business. And we went for 2 weeks every May, and we tasted through a bunch of houses. And sometimes it was only 2 appointments a day, and sometimes it was 4 appointments a day. And it was every day for 2 weeks, although we did get one Sunday off. And it's a lot, but you really get to know an area, you get to know the vintage, you get to taste everybody's 2017s, everybody's 2018s, whether it's Dolcetto, Chardonnay, Barbera, or their Barolo or Barbaresco, and then their single vineyards. And I remember in 2012, I asked a few winemakers, hey, what's your take on climate change? And in 2012, all of them were like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not seeing any kind of effect of climate change. I was just there 6 weeks ago, and all of them were like, my north-facing vineyards, meaning not facing the equator, so there isn't as much solar interception. My north-facing vineyards performed a lot better, and all of them were like, climate change is real. We're looking at higher elevation vineyards. We're fixing our canopies so that we're learning how to remanage our canopies so that our Nebbiolo, which is a late ripener, and if you've got a hot, long summer like this summer, they've really got to manage how to take care of their grapes to reach phenolic ripeness, to get the right amount of sugars, harvest them at the right time so they're delicious and not raisinated. But if they're raisinated, you can just pick those out. And in warm vintages like this year in Barolo, you can see a smaller yield, but from north-facing vineyards or high elevation vineyards, you'll see a lot more successful harvests. Don't forget the fires in California. I know the impact of the fires in California it's maddening, and it's so sad to see. It's horrifying. And there is a real thing called smoke taint. And if you have fires before your all grapes start off as green. And then your red grape varietals, Pinot Noir, Merlot, Petit Verdot, Cabernet Sauvignon, they go through a thing called veraison, where they turn color from green to red. And it happens really quickly in the matter of like 5 to 7 days. And if you have a fire during veraison, that is the worst possible time, because as the grape is changing, it's absorbing everything around it, which means smoke. And that's when you have the worst amount of smoke taint, which is really sad. Interesting. High altitude wines become a good part. Yes. Savoie, yes, yes. These high elevation vineyards provide breeziness. They provide a lot of solar interception. They provide a freshness because of the huge diurnal shift. So as we know, I'm sure some of you guys are skiers out there. So you know, like when you go to a really high elevation like Bale, or A Basin is also super high, Breckenridge, whatever. At the top of the mountain, the sun is so intense. Imagine you're a grape. That sunniness in the summertime, in the height of the summertime, is beautiful. But we also know from going to these places in the spring, in the summertime, the sun drops and so does the temperature. And you're like, oh my God, I need pants, I need jeans, I need a fleece and a turtleneck. And sometimes a hat, even, excuse me, even in the summertime. So what that does to the grapes, again, they're just like us. So in the wintertime, or excuse me, in the evening, during the grape growing season, they stop everything. And they're like, oh my God, I'm so cold. So they stop metabolizing any kind of sugar or energy. And then when the sun comes back up, they're like, oh my God, this is so great. And they start their ripening process all over again. It's super, super warm regions in parts of Australia. Barossa Valley is a great example, where it stays very warm at night and the grapes really continue to work overnight, which is not optimal. And that's when you lose acidity, because the grape metabolizes its own acidity because it's still awake from the sun being up, just like us. It wants to eat. And what does it look for? It eats its own sugar, and it eats its own acidity as well, excuse me. So when it eats its own acidity, that means there's less acidity for us to drink later on. And that acidity, again, refreshes your palate. It makes your mouth water. And if you don't have that in the wine, they can taste really heavy and flabby. I hope that was helpful. So what wine would we drink with fondue and raclette? That, my friend, is that Philippe? Philippe, you drink local. You go to Savoie, you drink Altesse, you drink Roussanne, you drink Jacquard. Jacquard is delicious with fondue. And I'm assuming cheese fondue and raclette, absolutely. And what's great about cheese, it's full of wonderful butter fat. Fat coats your palate, acidity makes your mouth water. So the acidity cleanses your palate of all that fat, so you get, your palate refreshes itself so you can taste both the wine and the food. I hope that was helpful. But it's going to become like Pommard? Like, do you mean like Pommard in Burgundy? Pommard is a pretty tannic example of Pinot Noir. And really tannic red wines, I find, are very challenging to pair with cheese. The tannins really get in they require a certain Burgundy wines, I find, require very certain cheeses. They are not friendly with every cheese. Yeah, but Pommard is great if you're doing any kind of roast or stew, because they tend to have really rich tannins and a big personality. Let's jump into our third wine. So our third wine is from Priorat. Priorat, again, is just outside of Barcelona. So it has a Mediterranean climate and really hot, sunny summers, and then rainy winters. It does not snow here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a little bit of Priorat. Priorat, also gorgeous. Look at that. You can kind of get a sense of the dark Licorea soils because the ground doesn't look sandy, if you will, or yellow. It looks really dark, and they are steep. There we go. There are the Licorea soils, and they are steep. So you get elevation. You get great drainage from the slate as well, because these grapes do not like having wet feet. So they like really good drainage in their soils. I want to show you another picture as well from Priorat, the Licorea soils. This is crazy. Look at these soils. So these are easily friable. So you can get super old vines here in Priorat because you plant the grapevine, and the roots, because the soil is so friable, can really dig down deep. So you can get roots that are several meters deep. And what they do is they look for nutrients, they look for water, and they're really spaced out, these grapevines, so that they don't compete as much with one another. So you get this wonderful concentration from all of these clusters on these grapes, on these grapevines that have all this room to themselves, but their roots are digging really deep into the ground. So I'm sure you've also noticed that this wine is a lot darker. That is not only because it is a few years older than these other wines. So we're in 2022. So this is a 3-year-old wine. I think I have my math right. 3-year-old wine, but also the main grape varietal in this is Garnacha Blanca. And we talked a little bit earlier about how it oxidizes really easily. And when white wines oxidize, they turn a little brown, much like if you cut open an apple and you left it on your kitchen counter and it turns a little brown, it oxidizes. So the flavor changes. Same thing with grapes because they're also a fruit. So let's pick this up. It's a really beautiful pale amber, isn't it? And on the nose, ooh, maybe a touch of like blonde caramel. There's a wonderful floral note in there, also like warm earth and warm granite. Ooh, citrus peel and nuts. It has not that it smells like sherry, but my mind just went there. And it has this like dried orange zest and lightly toasted blonde Marcona almonds. Smells great. Let's put this on our palate and see what it tastes like. So this might be a divisive wine. I want to see, excuse me. I want to see who likes this wine. And even if you dislike it, again, I didn't make the wine. Tell me how much you like or dislike this wine. So a little bit about this wine, the Terroir Limit. This was only started, excuse me, in 2001 by a German winemaker and a South African winemaker. And they loved Priorat. And they were like, you know what? We should try to go make our own Priorat. So they rented some vineyards, started making their own Priorats. And now today, 21 years later, they own some land. They also rent other vineyards. But for this specific historic series, what they do is really try to get a sense of Priorat as a whole. So what they do, for this particular wine, they work with small organic farmers and they buy all of their grapes from 9 different villages, across 9 different villages. So they're really trying to get a sense of what the entire area smells and tastes like. And they vinified this. It only sees cement and stainless steel. It sees no wood whatsoever. With a color like this in white wine, you actually might expect some wood to be on this, but on this particular example, no wood whatsoever. So let me jump over to the Q&A because I want to see how you guys, more acidic, but body, yes, more body. Absolutely. There's more texture. It has almost like a satinous feel on your palate, doesn't it? Like this wine, complex. Absolutely. This is absolutely the most complex of the 3. Love it. Complex, yes. Best one, delicious. Oh my God, I'm loving it. This is fantastic. I love that you guys love this wine because I find that it can be a little divisive. There are some people who are like, oh, it tastes like it's bad. It tastes like it went bad. It tastes like an oxidized apple. But for me, this has so much personality and so much texture and nuance as well. I really love that satiny, silky texture on your palate. And it has a really wonderful silky body. Each sip better than the last. That's right. I love it. And what I would actually pair with this, anything that has a really deep umami flavor, like roast chicken, like really seared and grilled sepia, and anything with fennel and herbs, because around this area in Priorat, you've got a lot of herbs and floral notes as well. I think chicken and fish would be, pork too. Like a seared pork chop when you get that really good crunch on one of the sides of it. Yes. Oh, delicious. Are there any other questions or comments on this last Priorat? Anything in the US heavier, different flavors. Yes, absolutely. anything in the US that can almost compete with the Priorat. I'm going to assume you mean the Priorat. I would say yes. And there are a handful of producers who I would recommend for that kind of complexity and intensity. I would look to Ted Lemon, who's a very famous winemaker, and his label is Littorai, which is Littorai. And he makes absolutely gorgeous Chardonnays that age for years, and they are nuanced and beautiful. He actually was the first ever American winemaker to run a Burgundian house, which is Rouleau, Roulot, in France. And that was in the 1980s. And he makes fantastic wine. But if you want a wine that's like this with these grape varietals, I would look to Tablas Creek, which is in the southern part of California. And they are Rhone heads, and they love Grenache Blanc and Grenache Gris and Bourblanc and all the grape varietals that you find in the south of France, a lot of which you also find in Priorat, actually. If you think about it, they're on the same latitude and very close to the water. So that makes sense. Another producer, I'm Teutonic up in Willamette Valley. There is a guy named Barnaby Tuttle, and he's got a big handlebar mustache and big crazy Einstein hair that sometimes he combs, and he makes the most phenomenal wines, a lot from higher elevation vineyards, and they are absolutely stunning wines. And I find that you get complexity there as well. So it'd be great with Thanksgiving turkey. Yes, it would be. Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially if you're doing a really herby or a stuffing that has a lot of herbs in it, something with sausage. Absolutely. Also with squash, if you wanted to pair that with a squash soup or any kind of butternut or acorn squash. And I wouldn't put too much sugary things in with your squash or your sides if you're going to do a white wine like the Priorat. But if you're doing your turkey, absolutely. Any other questions? Because I see we're starting to run out of time. No open questions. Okay. I might bounce this back then to you guys and see if there's anything else that I can do to make these clients fantastically happy with wine.
No, thank you so much for this presentation. I can feel your energy and passion for these wines. Loved all the pictures. We love, feeling like we're at these vineyards as we taste the wine. That's my favorite part, is imagining all the work that went into these in a different part of the world. And just like you described, small, family-owned, passed down from generation to generation. It's amazing. So thank you so much, Sarah. We absolutely love this. And thank you to all of you for joining us. We love working with all of you. We are so glad that we had the chance to share this with you tonight. And we look forward to talking with all of you again soon. Thank you, and have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.